So it's no secret that we're in the middle of one of the worst IT corrections in history. In fact, it's probably second only to the dot-com crash. But today I kind of want to walk through my career in education and what I did to navigate that market. Because here's the thing, I graduated college right when the dot-com crash was starting. I actually had a job lined up that got rescinded, and I was left scrambling to find employment. And I know there's a lot of people out there today that are trying to break into the field, and they're struggling just like I did back then. But first, let me kind of set the stage. So the dot-com crash, leading up to the late 1990s, the internet started to become a thing. And today we got all these buzzwords out there like AI and blockchain and all that stuff. Well, back then the buzzword was e-commerce. The internet was going to take over everything. All of the shopping was going to happen online, and everybody from mom and pop shops to big corporations needed a presence on the web. Now, there were no web developers really because it was a relatively new technology. So the demand started spiking. And it got to the point where if you could spell HTML, you could land a good job at a company, regardless of whether your skills were good or just kind of superficial. And this was a parallel to the market that was leading up to this current crash. From about 2017 to about 2022, the boot camps, all the accelerated training programs, they were putting out people with very superficial skills for the most part. And those people were getting employment just fine. But then the correction happens. So what happens during a correction? Well, employers have more employees and candidates in the marketplace to choose from. And when you have all those people to choose from, a couple things happen. Supply and demand, pay starts going down, and they can ask more of employees coming in. So a lot of employers today, because of the challenging market, just like back then, start asking for more skills and asking for more from their people because they can. But that was actually okay for me. So here's the first thing that really benefited me. When I was in college, I went far beyond the course material, because when you're in college classes, and this is true even today, they are disconnected from what real world developer jobs are like, because they have to fit everything into courses and credit hours and semesters. So you might take a database class in year one, and you might take a programming class in year 3, but very rarely do collegiate programs teach you how to build a full stack application and do things like version control and work in teams. Now they're getting better at this, and this is something I do help some colleges with, but the bottom line is when you're in a training program, especially in higher education, you need to take control of your own education. So what was I doing during college? Well, I went down to the bookstore once a semester, and especially during the summer, and I would buy books on programming, and I would just play around with things. It wasn't serious, like I was rigorously reading the book, but I was exploring concepts, building little toy applications, and trying to figure out what languages I liked and what type of work I wanted to do. And then on top of that, a friend introduced me to something called a MUD, multi-user dungeon. Now, if you don't know what a MUD is, that's okay, because they're not really popular or around anymore. But imagine the game World of Warcraft, except it's text-based, and you're playing it over a telnet terminal connection. So you're going in there and you're literally typing go north, fight monster, loot body. And that kind of gaming was really nerdy back then. It's still pretty nerdy today, but they had a volunteer group that wrote all the code for that game. And because I was so interested in coding, I went through their interview process and earned the right to become a staff member of this volunteer coding game. Now, it was written in LPC and the server was Unix. And it wasn't so much about writing the code, though I did learn a bit about writing code. It was working with a team on an existing code base. So I had to go in and read other people's code, and I had to make changes to that code. It really started to expose me to the difference between good, easy to read, maintainable code and something that somebody relatively unskilled just threw together. And those lessons really stuck with me and kind of made me develop a style and an approach to keeping things very simple and very readable. And that was a very valuable experience. I also got to sit in on a lot of planning meetings. So we would argue about, new powers that we should add to the game, or new regions and adventures and quests that we could put in. And we also had to debate new features for the system itself. Like, I actually coded the entire crafting system for that game. So loot drops, recipes, and building out that from scratch was one of my first major projects that got used by other people. Now, there's not a lot of MUDs out there that you can volunteer for today, but what you can do is pull from open source libraries. Now, I'm not going to tell you I've seen other creators talking about, you should contribute to open source. Well, look, you're a beginner. The chances of you writing code that's good enough for a major open source project to adopt is pretty slim, but there's nothing stopping you from forking an open source repository and playing with it and trying to add your own features and really getting to know code bases and practicing that way. So all those things go beyond what you're doing in the classroom, and you should find time to do it once you've learned the fundamentals. Or alternatively, if you're into gaming like I was, there's a lot of games out there that you can write mods for. So go download some mods, open up the libraries, and practice your coding techniques, because a lot of these mods are written in pretty user-friendly languages like Lua. And that's something that if you have good coding fundamentals, you should be able to learn that language fairly quickly. So a lot of that experience I got before I had a job was through my interest in gaming and my interest in volunteering and working on things that were available in the open source community. And then the next thing I did is I got work experience that was technical whenever I could, even if it wasn't programming related, so tech adjacent roles. I started out, my first paid job in college that was technical was actually doing phone support in the university modem pool. So every time a semester started, people would have to hook up their computers to the university pool, and most non-technical people couldn't do it correctly. So they would call you, and then I had to troubleshoot their issues over the phone. Well, this taught me a lot, actually. It taught me how to explain things to people who weren't technical, because I'm trying to walk them through fixing something on their computer without being able to see their screen, because we didn't really have remote desktop back then either. So, current support professionals, you have it so much easier than we used to have back in the day. I mean, and I'll just sidebar here. I'm going to tell you a quick story. One of the worst experiences I ever had in that job is I was helping this older woman, try to connect her PC to the modem pool. It just wasn't working. And I was walking her through the steps and having her check all these settings, and it just would not work. And we're about 30 minutes into this call, and this lady just stops and says, ever since my PC caught on fire, it just hasn't worked right. And that was one of my first facepalm moments as a technical professional working with non-technical people. So I was just like, wow, you could have just led with your computer caught on fire once, and I could have had you just look at the part, and if that part was black, we could have figured out that was, the problem and why you couldn't connect to the modem pool. But anyway, tech support jobs are a really great tech adjacent way to make some money and get some technical experience on your resume, because people don't look down on you for having a tech support start, because that does mean you are technical and you were doing technical work. So go ahead and look for tech adjacent roles to bide your time while you're trying to get into the field. Now, I went on from there. That was for the university. The pay was pretty bad. I ended up finding another tech support role at a hospital system. Now, that was a little bigger. I got to work with a lot of different equipment. I got to work with some new software, and that's my first experience with like issue tracking and ticketing and, having deadlines to get things resolved. But more important than all that stuff was having to interact with those help desk customers. It really taught me how to communicate with people, how to be patient, and really upped my kind of soft skills game at that point. And that's something today that I still recommend that a lot of people work on, even though they are technical. Because the things that are going to set you apart from other people is those soft skills, your ability to communicate, your ability to hit deadlines, your ability to explain things to people who aren't technical, especially in today's modern world, because agile is a thing. You're usually working on teams that are a mix of technical and non-technical people. And the better you are at communicating with them and interacting with them, the more success you're going to have in your career. And that's not saying that tech skills aren't important, because they are, but in my experience, if two people are relatively even in technical skills, they're going to want to work with the person who's a better communicator. And that's just the way, the job market and career stuff works. So with all of this going on, when I was preparing to graduate, I was one of the only people in my graduating class who had this level of experience. I could build full stack applications. I could work with team members. I understood debugging. I understood project planning, and I was pretty good at communication. So I was way ahead of the people in my class, and I was able to find a job and get that job offer before I graduated. I graduated in May. The dot-com crash started in March. So in late April, the company that I had agreed to work for came back and said, no, never mind. We're canceling this. We're not going to hire people this year. Then I was stuck. I went from being one of the earliest people in my class to finding employment to being one of the ones that, was scrambling. So what did I do? Well, the market was so bad that it was really difficult to find jobs in the cities. So I started expanding my search into the more rural and small town areas, because those areas don't have high populations, and companies that need technical workers there have trouble finding, attracting, and keeping talent. And I was able to find a job at a small accounting software company in a town called Findlay, Ohio. And Findlay was one of those towns, it's basically based around a college, and there's some businesses there, but not a big town, not a very wealthy, well-to-do area. I was able to get in, find a job there. I moved from the city, into Findlay, found a little studio apartment, and I was off to the races. So I thought. What happened is that company was acquired by a larger accounting firm 6 months into my position. So I was just barely getting acclimated. I had just figured out all the tools, and I was starting to be productive, and the rug gets pulled out from me again. They get acquired. So they go around and start interviewing everybody for their own jobs, which is what happens when there's a merger and acquisition. Fortunately, I impressed them enough that they wanted to keep me, but the unfortunate part was that they wanted me to move to the corporate headquarters of the acquiring company, and that was in Fargo. And if you're one of my international audience members, Fargo is basically the armpit of hell. Sorry for anybody who lives in Fargo, but the winters are brutal. You have to literally plug your car battery into the wall in the winter because it gets so cold, and it's out in the middle of nowhere where I don't want to live. But they did offer me a severance package, if I wasn't going to take the offer. So I took that severance and I left. Now, I'm sitting there in Findlay, Ohio. There's no other jobs. So what do? I have to start applying, and I'm applying in the region, but the market was getting worse and worse at this time, because from like 2000 to 2002, it was bad. So now here I am in late 2000 looking for work. I have barely any experience. So I start applying all around the country. I start saying, okay, well, where are the major tech hubs? New York City, San Francisco, Seattle, Atlanta. And I start doing the same strategy. I start looking at the regions around those big cities where there's smaller companies, and those companies typically have trouble finding and attracting talent. And I struck gold again. I was able to find a job in upstate New York. Now, the trick of this, and I'll admit now I was a little dishonest when I was in my job search, because when you're looking at regions substantially farther away from where you live, one of the questions every employer asks is, well, are you going to relocate? Like, what's your living situation? Because they want to have local talent. So I made up a fictional girlfriend, and I just told them that I was seeing a girl, her family's from this area, and I'm going to move out there to be with her. And everybody bought it. So that was my big excuse, and it really helped me with my relocation problem, because they just accepted that. And then, of course, when I took the job in New York, a couple months later, unfortunately, my girlfriend broke up with me. That's why nobody could ever meet her. And it's sad that I moved all the way out here, but I'm going to make the best of the situation, and I'm going to stay. So, I don't condone lying about your technical skills, but if you need to embellish your situation to satisfy some HR person, go for it. Knock yourself out. So I moved to New York, and I joined an HMO, which is a health insurance provider. And I got in there, and I was really motivated to do a good job, and I was really motivated to kind of prove myself and make sure that my job would be safe. And I did a pretty good job at that. They were moving from a legacy system into newer skills, and around this time is when the .NET framework came out. And I saw that Microsoft was moving in that direction. This is my tip for this. When you see major companies moving in a certain direction, that's probably something you should pay attention to. So Microsoft released the .NET framework. They said, this is the future of programming on our stack. And I said, Microsoft's a pretty big company. I should probably learn what this is all about. So I did. And while I was working for this HMO, they were moving from a legacy system to a .NET system. I was able to pick up some really good experience. And I went back to my old tricks. I would go to meetings and I'd really work on my soft skills, and I'd really spend the time to help the business users understand what the tech team was doing. I helped them come up with edge cases and just really helped them with their process. And what started happening was, even though I was a junior level developer, the business people started asking for me specifically to come to their meetings. And I actually became kind of the king of the whiteboard. And to this day, I can't resist writing on a whiteboard. But I would jump up there and I'd write down things they were saying so they knew I was listening, and I'd map out all these processes and ways we could improve things and just explain all these technical concepts. Funny, eventually, I became a technical trainer and a teacher. This was kind of the start of that path. But that experience built me such a reputation and such a rapport with the people working at that company that one of the business people actually introduced me to another small company that they knew, they were related to this person, that was having trouble finding talent. And that was my first job hop, because I had moved to New York, I was getting paid junior wages, and this other company wanted to hire me, and it was really good for the negotiations. I was able to get like a $20,000 per year raise changing jobs. And taking that job was kind of a turning point in my career. I mean, the extra money was nice, but I did stay at that job for a couple years, and it was a really small company, only about 20 people. So again, I got to wear a lot of hats, and I got to experience a lot of things outside of just going in and putting my head down and writing code every day. And since I stayed at that job for a couple years, I was able to kind of wait out the .com crash. And when the market started to recover, I looked around and I kind of had the benefit of being one of the last men standing, because a lot of my peers and people that graduated with me and people that were trying to enter the market at that time, they either stopped working on their skills or they gave up and they left the field. So when things finally started to recover and demand picked up, here I was one of the only people my age that had the experience that I had. And from there, the career was really smooth sailing compared to that start. So let me back it up now and just kind of recap the experiences and what I really took away from that. And it started early in college. I couldn't find an internship that let me write code. So I was willing to work a tech adjacent role. Did I enjoy working support? No, I hated that job. It was low pay, and I had to explain things to people who didn't understand computers all day. Did I benefit? Yes, I learned communication and patience, but I did not enjoy that job. Taking that job was a sacrifice, and I had to motivate myself every day to go in and clock in for that job. Not pleasant. But having anything on your resume that is tech adjacent is better than having nothing. So that's one thing right now in this tough market. Broaden your search. Don't just look for developer positions. If you can find tech adjacent roles, do it. You can do anything for 2 years. The next thing I learned is that companies are not to be trusted. I had that first job offer get rescinded. And then my second job, they asked me to move to an area where I didn't want to live to keep my job. So right off the bat, I learned that businesses are businesses. They are in it to make money. And if you're a part of them making money in the way that they want to do it, you have a job. And the minute that equation changes, you're going to get laid off. There are no worker protections. You have to manage your own career and treat that career like a business. And if you're going to be a good business, that means you need to keep acquiring valuable skills. You need to keep building your customer base or your network, and you need to just grind that out. And that's something you need to do every month for your entire career. I still do it today. I go speak at events. I network with people. I go to conferences. I go to meetup groups. I'm always talking to people online and just building that network. And if you get to a place where you have a strong network, you will eventually reach a point where you don't find yourself applying for jobs that much anymore. Most of my work today does come from my network and the connections I've made. I get referrals and I work with the same people I've worked with before. And the only reason they're willing to keep working with me is because they trust me, because I built those skills, because I'm a good communicator. Those are the things that will really separate you besides the technical skills. But you do have to work on those technical skills. Don't just stick to learning whatever it is in the class you're taking. Even the Skill Foundry courses, which, my learners are always talking about how great the courseware is. And it is really good. and I give them projects to work on, but they also need to be working on their own side projects and their own passion things, because eventually they will reach the end of the courseware. And at that point, they have to have the foundation to work on things on their own. And they're going to need to self-motivate to do that if they want to be successful and maximize things in the long term. So if you do all these things, I know it's tough right now, but just remember, if you don't give up, if you keep building these things, building your network, building your tech skills, eventually you will be one of the last people standing. And when the market comes back, you're going to be in a really good position, because we're already seeing computer science enrollment dropping, and we're already seeing all these boot camps closing. So the attrition is happening, and the people who aren't really truly passionate about this, they're going to get out of the field, and it's going to get better. It's just going to take a little more time. So tough it out and code happy.